I want to start by saying that I called this debate with the support and backing of all of the members of Parliament for Birmingham, and I would like to pay special credit to the member for Hodge Hill, the member for Erdington, the member for Birmingham Northfield, for Birmingham Hall Green, Birmingham Edgbaston and Birmingham Perry Barr, who have joined me here today. And Birmingham Apologies. It used to be Birmingham Hall Green when I was a kid. I also want to say a massive thank you to all the members from across the Midlands, especially the member for Meriden and the member for Solihull, who have also always supported this campaign, and to thank the members from Northern Ireland who are here tonight for their support. I wish to pay a special mention to the Right Honourable Member for Lee, who recently gave voice in this place to this issue. Today I want to focus on two areas. I want to breathe life into a debate that has become about claim and counter-claim and a very famous miscarriage of justice. It is time that in this place and out there that the story of the 21 people who died became our focus. I will then go on to cover some of the issues that the families of the 21 victims have faced in the fight to receive fair and equal access to our justice system. I am sure that the Minister is poised to tell the House that yesterday the families were informed that they will be granted some form of legal aid funding. This was not the case when I called for the debate, and perhaps today I will do a little bit less fist waving, which I do love to do, than I might have. However, their treatment and the legal funding granted still poses fundamental questions that must be answered. For Brummies, it's a bit like knowing where you were when Kennedy died. If you're from Birmingham, you have a story to tell about the night of the pub bombings. My parents were driving away from the city with my two brothers, then a baby and a toddler, in the back of the car when they heard the blast. My dad returned to work the following Monday to find a young woman he thought had been killed. That woman was 18-year-old Maxine Hambleton. 21 people died in the Birmingham pub bombings on the 21st of November 1974. 21 people who have been largely forgotten in a story that for so many became about 6 men. When I was a kid, the story of the Birmingham Six was everywhere. I think it's worth noting that it was not the justice system which acted to correct itself in that matter. It was the action of members of this House at the time, namely Chris Mullins, that led to their release. This House has and can have an important role to play in this story. Along with similar miscarriages of justice at the time, the story of that fatal night became for many a story about the accused and the war in Northern Ireland. The lives and loves of the people who died got lost. Today we must remember them. They were Desmond Riley, Eugene Riley, Maxine Hambleton, Jane Davis, Michael Beasley, Lynn Bennett, Stanley Bodman, James Caddick, Thomas Chater, James Craig, Paul Davies, Charles Gray, Anne Hayes, John Jones, Neil Marsh, Marilyn Nash, Pamela Palmer, Maureen Roberts, John Rowland, Trevor Thrupp and Stephen Wally. Their names are not enough. The people who died had lives and responsibilities. That night, 6 friends stood around a bar at the Mulberry Bush, like we all do after a long day's work, sharing a pint and a joke. It was Stan Bodman's turn to buy a round of drinks, a larger-than-life character who was the life and soul of the group. His mates included John Rowlands, an electrician, a father and a husband, and John Jones, a postman, who that day had returned from 2 weeks' leave. Stan's request for drinks saved the life of the barmaid, but ended that of him and his friends. When they were found in the rubble, they were positioned exactly where they stood, in a circle, friends in death, as they had been in life. At the same time that Stan was ordering his last round of drinks, Paul Davis was walking past the Mulberry Bush when the bomb went off. He and his friends died outright. He was 20 years old, with 1 young child and 1 on the way. His partner never got over his death, and she died in tragic circumstances a few years later, leaving her child an orphan. Maxine Hambleton had popped into the tavern in the town to hand out tickets for a housewarming party she was planning to give. That night, Maxine and Jane Davis, who was the youngest victim at 17, both died. Lives extinguished before they ever had time to begin. I met Julie Hambleton, sister of Maxine, 5 years ago. Until recently, we did not realise the connection between our families. Julie, her family and the families of many others who died that night have been campaigning for years to find out what happened to their loved ones. I want to stress today that the victims of these killings are not confined to those who died, but for those who were injured also, and the hundreds of people affected through loss, grief and fear that followed. Julie wrote to me last week. Maxine was our sister. She had an aura of such maturity that even now I remember her. Those memories are of a young woman who had a purpose and direction in life. My memories of Maxine are very few and far between, which, as I'm sure you can imagine, is hard. I would love to have memories of her. I sit here at work writing this to you, crying, fighting to try and remember more about my beautiful, kind, generous, funny big sister. I remember how we used to watch Thunderbirds together when we were living in Yardley in the old cottage opposite the church. We used to sit and watch it every week. Watching these programmes helps me feel her presence. Our love for her will never, ever die. For as long as we live, we will fight until our dying breath, because we know, without any doubt, that she would have died for any one of us to get the truth. The families want to know who killed their loved ones. They want to know what happened in the investigation, still so shrouded in secrecy and questions. After years of individual battles, the families came together to form the campaign group Justice for the 21. Julie Hambleton, who was just a kid at the time of the bombings, leads this campaign with a tenacity and emotion as if it had happened yesterday. I admire her resilience. She has fought this for longer than I have been alive. And so to the issue today. In June this year, the Birmingham and Solihull coroner ruled that on the basis of submissions made by legal teams of 3 of the families of the victims, there was sufficient reason to resume the inquest. It is important to state here that the legal support that has been offered to date has been provided completely for free to the victims' families. Without the fight from the families and the generosity of their lawyers, the inquest would never, ever have been resumed. Today is the 26th of October, and the day after tomorrow, on the 28th of October, submissions are to be made on the scope and process of the resumed inquest. I'll give way.
Grateful to my honourable friend, and can I congratulate her on her speech? She speaks for all of us in what she's saying. Can I just say that one thing I do hope that the Minister will address in his summing up is that the months that the families had to wait, those just last few months, between the inquest being granted and hearing the legal aid being granted, that just shows lack of respect. And I do think an apology for that extra delay is something that would be useful today.
I thank my honourable friend for the intervention, and I couldn't agree with him more. The families involved were told only yesterday that arrangements will be made for their legal teams to work with another firm and receive legal aid. Does the Minister think that 3 days' notice on this matter is sufficient? I want to stress how much I welcome the progress that has been made since I called for this debate. When I requested this debate, the families were still in the position where they had no idea if they were to be granted funding at all, even though the families applied for exceptional case funding from the Legal Aid Authority in January of this year, and the resumed inquest was granted in June this year. In the meantime, the families also applied to the Home Secretary to seek the use of the Hillsborough Funding and Administration Scheme. The families have been given messages of support all along the way from the Home Secretary, and who is now the Prime Minister, the new Home Secretary and the Justice Secretary. However, these warm words have proven to be little else. The legacy of what happened at Hillsborough for many marked a turning point in how the families of those bereaved or injured in large public disasters would be treated. Lord Wills, while speaking in his Public Advocate Bill in the other place, stated that when he met the families of those that died in Hillsborough in 2009, one message that came through over and over again was that they wanted to find a way to prevent other similarly bereaved families suffering and having to endure in the way that they had suffered and endured for 20 years. The Prime Minister should rightly feel proud for her role in how the Hillsborough families finally got justice. but I am afraid to say that the systematic problems these brave families fought against still remains. In this case that we're discussing tonight, the current Home Secretary said that the fund said that to fund the Birmingham pub bombings families through the Hillsborough scheme was not appropriate. I take real issue with this judgment. Both the Home Secretary and the Prime Minister have used the fact that the inquest of the 7/7 bombings were funded in this way, even though the scheme that those families used is no longer available, as the Legal Aid Sentencing and Punishment of Offender Act in 2012 removed it. The bereaved Birmingham families feel that they were strung along by the Home Secretary on this matter and ultimately let down. They tell me that she told them that she'd written to the Justice Secretary to give her support for exceptional case funding from the Legal Aid Agency. When Julie Hambleton and I approached the Justice Secretary in Birmingham, she seemed to have no knowledge of the case. The families then received a letter from the Justice Secretary saying that she nor any politician could influence the outcome of the Legal Aid Agency, which seemed completely contrary to what they'd been told by the Home Secretary. With 3 days to go before the process is to begin, the families are informed of an arrangement that has strings attached. They feel that they have been misled and fobbed off. I would ask the ministers to bear in mind that these are families who lost their sisters, mothers, brothers, daughters and partners. They are just ordinary working class people who are trying to fight justice in the face of powerful actors who they already don't trust. And the appalling way that the funding for their case has been handled pushes them, and I have to say me, into really doubting that those in power want to see justice done. Like with Hillsborough before them, this is a David and Goliath fight. The former Chief Coroner, who will chair the resumed inquest, called for parity of funding in inquests where there is state involvement.
I'm very grateful to my honourable friend. She's making a really valuable contribution here. In terms of seeking parity, wouldn't it be useful to know just how much public money is being made available to the police and other government agencies to fund their legal costs in this situation, and how that compares to the help being given to the families?
I thank my honourable friend for the intervention, and not only do I agree with him, but also the Chief Coroner, the old Chief Coroner, who now will chair the resumed inquest, calls for exactly the same level of parity in his annual report. Parity of funding, therefore, means at rates available to other parties in the resumed inquests. West Midlands Police have apparently set aside £1 million so far. Former police officers will be represented through the Police Federation. Government departments will no doubt be represented by lawyers from the private sector. Tonight I ask whether the legal aid for the relatives of the victims of the Birmingham pub bombings is appropriate or sufficient. I accept it may be appropriate in many circumstances, but Hillsborough is a successful model, and no explanation as to why it cannot be replicated here in this case, or in fact in future cases of this kind, has been given. This is in the gift of the Home Secretary and the Prime Minister. I will give it back.
For giving a very passionate and a very from the heart comments tonight, and I thank her for that. The Honourable Lady has outlined very clearly the process so far. The process very, very clearly lacks compassion, lacks understanding for those who lost loved ones in the Birmingham bomb atrocity. And does the Honourable Lady feel that the right and the same support that the Hillsborough victims had is one that should be in place for here to ensure that they can find out the truth about their loved ones who were murdered by the IRA terrorists so horribly so many years ago?
I thank the Honourable Member for his intervention, and I think that this case and others that will almost certainly be discussed in this place will call for some sort of very specific mechanism to be in place in the future. Can the Minister guarantee to me today that legal aid funding allocated will provide the Birmingham families with parity? As a Birmingham tax and ratepayer, and as a representative of Birmingham tax and ratepayers, all we ask is that fairness is considered in how our money is spent. Hundreds of my constituents and thousands of Brummies have signed petitions and written letters to support these families. Without the certainty of parity, how can any of them, and in fact any citizen in this country, ever believe that if the worst were to happen to their relatives, that those responsible would ever face justice? So many people in this country believe that the powerful establishment figures act against them. Levels of disillusionment in the UK today should be a worry to each and every one of us. The Prime Minister stood on the steps of Downing Street and she said she would fight against burning injustice. She said, and I quote, "When we take the big calls, we'll think not of the powerful, but of you. When we pass new laws, we'll listen not to the mighty, but to you." I stand here today and I ask on behalf of the ordinary families in Birmingham, will this government help them to be mighty and powerful, or are these words worthless?
Yeah.